Hi, it's Conor Svensson here, founder and CEO of Web3 Labs. This is a conversation I had with Val Bercovici, founder and CEO of ClickToNFT. Val is a technology veteran, having spent the last few decades working with data and cloud technology providers before jumping into Web3. Val's perspective, having worked on the front lines during the client-server revolution, then smartphone and the cloud revolutions, and then now, of course, Web3, provides some really interesting perspectives on the fundamental technology challenges that Web3 solves. He also discusses why he came from a B2B data focus in Web2 into a B2C NFT play with Web3. Given Val's experience, we could have kept talking for a lot longer, and I'm sure you'll see why I'm keen to get him back for a follow-up interview. Val, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here today on the podcast.
Likewise, Connor.
You've been very involved in Web2 and cloud for a number of years. I'm really interested to hear what is it about Web3 that kind of put it first on your radar, but then also has really, pulled you in so that you're invested enough in it that you're launching new ventures in the space and being pulled away from what you've been doing for the last 10 plus years.
It actually was a two-phase journey, just as you're describing the question. Initially, was the geek factor. I've been involved with databases my entire career, from pre-relational SQL days, to date myself a bit, all the way to some of the more modern real-time streaming systems we see. And data integrity always fascinated me because it was so easy to either lose it through sloppiness or tamper with it through maliciousness. And all the ransomware attacks we see nowadays are a prime example of that. So the concept of building integrity at the data layer, natively, implicitly, directly, that was something that really fascinated me. And that was the geek part of distributed ledgers, blockchains, and so forth. That was absolutely the initial attraction. But then I started to take a look at the use cases that people were coming up with on top of this new stack. And I use Web3 as an umbrella term for all the elements, crypto, NFTs, blockchains, etc., in this stack. And what really excited me is the fact that now users of services built on this stack can actually become, we say the formal term stakeholders, but in reality, actual investors in the products and services they use. And I thought back to my experience of first using Facebook, which I think a lot of us enjoyed in the original days, and realizing when they were making a lot of money from ad revenues, feeling like I deserved part of that because I contributed to the overall success of that network and that social graph. And of course, as users, we got nothing. We became the product. We got bombarded with ads and so forth and the targeting. So the opportunity to improve upon that, still retain all the attractiveness of a social network as an example, but actually make every user a partial investor in the success of that network. That's the most powerful aspect of Web3 for me, and crypto done right. That's attracted me and really motivates me now to dedicate the rest of my career to it.
That's absolutely fascinating to hear, in part because most of the time when you ask that question, it's like, oh yeah, I got into Bitcoin, or something along those sorts of lines. But having come from that data integrity lineage, a bit of an joke there, but yeah, it's a really interesting angle. And so was it in terms of what kind of brought that to the fore in your mind? Was it when you started to learn about all this this crazy stuff that was happening with cryptocurrencies, and then when you dug deeper, you saw how sound the underlying computational theory was behind it all, or was it actually more with some of the protocols that you started learning about, and that sort of other angle?
It had to be at the protocol layer for me because I had to understand, and I realized it was more than technology. I had a basic understanding of the cryptography, and of course had to get deeper into that and really understand the math. Had a basic understanding of the network principles and the operational requirements of operating a decentralized distributed ledger across multiple nodes. Certainly had a basic understanding of the code on GitHub and so forth that powered it. And the aha moment, the light bulb went on for me when I realized it really was this nearly, it's never perfect, but this ideal balance of aligned incentives. It's actually an old VC investor term in Silicon Valley. A really good startup has aligned incentives between the investors, which just want pure profit and ROI, and founders, which want to build a great business that serves a lot of people and is successful. This the concept, the original Bitcoin white paper, which is canon for a lot of us, 13 plus years old now, codified these aligned incentives between developers, between miners, between validators, between users of this network, between app developers on top of the protocol. The elegance of that is really, I think, what ultimately, once I learned it and understood it, which took time, it took years actually, that's what excited me. And that's what gave me that conviction, that really personal confidence to say, there's something really disruptive there. And for me, I've noticed that I've been in part of three major disruptions and tech disruptions in my career. I was someone, again, dating myself, that brought, client server technologies, which is an old term for basically taking the home PCs that everyone had before Y2K in the 80s and the 90s and making them actual first class work devices. So that was a big trend I was part of. I started working with Microsoft very early on, before they were the standard inside every company, and helping take a home PC and make it again a business critical tool. And the next major disruption many years later, more than a decade later, was really right after the iPhone came out. And none of us realized how profound a shift that would be in all of our lives globally. But specifically, the cloud backend part. Always been a database guy, always been a backend infrastructure guy. So the ability to serve ultimately billions of users having their own portable computer, high power, very flexible portable computer in their pockets, serve that with cloud backends, led me to really champion the cloud trend. And let me champion it particularly by helping Amazon with some storage standards in the early days, making those more internationally accepted. And then more recently, in about 7 years ago, with helping Google take an internal technology project known as Borg and helping them open source it as a very popular, perhaps one of the most popular projects today, open source projects called Kubernetes, helping them do that through a community structure called the Cloud Native Compute Foundation, where I was just lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time and be a founding board member there. So, having been through those two very seismic shifts in the industry and having had sort of a front row seat to both of those, what I'm seeing with Web3 parallels that journey, parallels the confusing time we might find ourselves in between right now, because as disruption is beginning to happen, lots of the disrupted, of course, push back. Lots of the disruptors get very overly evangelical, and there certainly can be a period of confusion and lots of myth busting required, lots of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, FUD being tossed back and forth. But it's inevitable what happens at the other end of that. Once we get past this phase, just like cloud was very speculative and frowned upon 13, 14 years ago, and it's the norm now. It's how we do business. It's how we live most of our lives and use most of the services we depend on personally. Web3 will be that and more, because as we'll get into later, it impacts way more than the technology stack we use for running our businesses, or just conducting things we like to do in our daily lives. It really changes the economics of business and changes the economics of us as consumers, as citizens, as patients, as family members. When you change the economics of that, you impact a lot more than a typical tech trend does.
And it's definitely an area as well that I'd like to dig a bit deeper into, in terms of talking in terms of client server, iPhone and cloud, and then Web3, because a lot of the prevailing narratives right now, with respect to Web3, of course, come from the perspective of, well, Web1 was more around the idea of read-only websites. Web2 brought in social networks, but it also brought in API type services and so on. And then Web3, of course, is you've got a lot of themes encompassed underneath that, be that tokenization, decentralized identity, decentralized storage, and so on and so forth. But I think, though, whilst I would certainly, cloud kind of came alongside Web2 and was a big enabler for many of these Web2 success stories to spin up. But then it's not often, although people are aware of it kind of aligning time-wise, it's something that's not always discussed in terms of Web2. Do you kind of see the whole these as being slightly separate things, like these sort of architectural perspectives in terms of client server, cloud, and then there'll be something around Web3 for us to dig into, or do you kind of see them as being closely aligned with the kind of Web 1, 2, and 3? Even you can argue that they were enablers for it, so to speak.
It's a great question. I would have to say that I think they're independent. So a lot of these protocols, as we've seen, just as they've been introduced publicly, the protocols are very composable. So whether we're talking about a core layer one like Bitcoin or Ethereum, of course, which is wildly popular now, or talking about layer two optimization layers, or these yield earning protocols, DeFi protocols built on top of layer one and so forth, they're all fairly independent. But because they grew up or they were introduced and evolved alongside the maturity of cloud services, because let's face it, the front end of most Web3 apps, the presentation layer, is still fundamentally a cloud or website, an interactive website. So these things are all congealing and sort of coagulating at the same time right now. Although they originated, it's like a good recipe. All these ingredients are separate, but when you combine them in the right way, some magical flavors come out and experiences happen. And I think that's why Web3 is catching on right now, because even 12 months ago, you or I could not have sat here and predicted where the NFT market is today. It is already a giant industry with incredible momentum and high profile celebrities all over it. And no one could spell NFT about a year ago, 12 months ago. So that's the magic that's happening here, is the timing is certainly right now, where again, it's the evolution of technology, it's the evolution of all these protocols, but certainly some really cool use cases popping up, technologies being ready, the fact that we can scale the presentation layer, the app layer, the web layer of a particular blockchain protocol, scale it to web scale to billions of users, because Amazon is there and Microsoft and Google, Oracle, cloud services are there, Alibaba in China and so forth. I think it's the combination and the timing that's creating this magical moment that's getting all of us talking about it.
So you give a fascinating perspective, especially when you mentioned about how influential, of course, iPhones were in your experience, and that enabled so many people to get access to the internet in a way that was far more convenient than before, and all sorts of products and services came off the back of it. Could the NFT, albeit somewhat of a different kind of enabler, be something that's similar in that regard, because it does cross the chasm? It reaches people who then they're not just about the technology, they're interested in the well, I guess the brands and all the other things that are going with it. Well, what would be your take there?
I love that discussion topic because I actually predict, and this is a little bit controversial to say today, that NFTs will be extremely boring in a few years. And I say that because they'll just be infrastructure, plumbing. It'll be assumed to be part of all of our daily lives in a few years. Much the same way today, if we say I work for an internet company or I work for a web company, it doesn't mean anything anymore. It's not novel. It was 15, 20 years ago. NFTs are still extremely novel in their first year of sort of mainstream existence. But because they will be how every driver's license is issued, every property title or rental agreement is ultimately certified on chain, every kind of personal and business transaction through daily lives, government interaction, business receipts, fundamentally, NFTs are going to be fused into all of that. And so that's why I believe that NFTs will be as boring as the internet and web is today for that layer of the stack. But like the iPhone, they're going to enable these applications and use cases, which are effectively on the back of quick and instant settlement for payments, instant notarization of any activity. We just can't imagine all the cool new, fundamentally new economies that are going to grow out of this innovation.
Yeah, and that sort of mainstream adoption enables everyone to kind of level set in terms of they get what an NFT is, as you say. Like a year ago, most people didn't, so you instantly have that foundation upon which many companies can build upon.
Precisely.
So, thinking about the cloud native compute foundation, because again, I love always hearing perspectives from people when they can talk in terms of what's happened in previous iterations of tech, because we all know how much history tends to repeat itself. Within blockchain anyway, there have been a number of standard initiatives and so on. I myself was involved in the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance for a number of years, but then there's been some other groups that I have been. But at the same time, I think that it's given that where we are with the wider adoption of Web3, you don't have, I think, a single body yet that's quite as sticky. I certainly believe that organizations like the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance will stick around and they will be influential longer term because they've been going about this stuff the right way. But with respect to the Cloud Native Compute Foundation, there's a lot of technologies under that umbrella which really power so much of the web businesses now. And so at what point do you feel like Web3 can get to that point where you have something that's kind of equivalent in terms of the standardization? And sorry, I should also mention Hyperledger as well, because that is a similar sort of structure. It's underneath the Linux Foundation, like the Cloud Native Compute Foundation. But again, there's like there's not, it's not as well established in the broader kind of business sense.
That's a great question. We could probably spend the rest of this podcast on that topic alone. My observation has been the CNCF experience was just wonderful for me because it really encapsulated all these things I'd known and read about in other initiatives, other standards initiatives, and so forth, whether they were ISO standards or IEEE standards or IETF or some others that I'd been loosely involved in. I got to see it again firsthand. And what I noticed is, and these are the same problems we're seeing with the Web3 communities and the Web3 governance models today, is that people are people and everyone has their own perspectives based on their life experiences and their own incentives driven by their compensation structure for the companies they work for or organizations they represent. So what I realized is actually, ironically, we all hear, certainly in the US, about Warren Buffett, a legendary investor. And he's got a close associate called Charlie Munger, who for me has an evergreen quote, a timeless quote, which is, show me someone's compensation model and I'll predict their behavior. So what I'm seeing right now is the CNCF and the Linux Foundation, really, that was the umbrella for the CNCF, pioneered some amazing open source community development, community engagement, and especially community governance and evolutionary models. And of course, being open source, everything's fully transparent and document and reproducible as long as we credit them when they're licensed and so forth. All of the operational maturity of that needs to be applied to these new, embryonic Web3 communities that we're seeing right now. Not enough of that is happening. But on the other hand, the incentives around CNCF, without naming and shaming vendors, some of which I used to work for or work with very closely, the incentives models were all around what's best for the corporation. And if they're public, of course, they're shareholders. So pure bottom line profit. And then how do we compensate our open source representatives to drive some technology agendas in support of that pure bottom line profit model? So very hierarchical, and ultimately the aligned incentives just weren't as crisp, weren't as granular, because they had to go through all these organization layers, mostly private sector, some public sector, and so forth. Web3 has the opportunity, again, not to just take the benefit of all that operational excellence of how we put communities of diverse people together to produce technology, but fuse in the incentives at a granular level for the individual contributors, for the coders. We look at Heartbleed and all these other vulnerabilities that happen in the cybersecurity landscape, and we realize they happen because developers that worked on these projects that trillions of dollars of economics depend on got paid nothing to maintain that code, and that way they let it sort of atrophy over years and a vulnerability exposed. So fixing that tragedy of the commons problem is precisely what Web3 tokenomics can do when you align incentives, when you figure out a way to micro compensate, because again, we don't have to talk about vast sums of numbers here, but micro compensate people for their individual, perhaps line by line, comment by comment, documentation by documentation contributions to these seemingly obscure projects that in aggregate, form the internet that we depend on today. So that I think is what we need to do, is the best, to summarize it, the best of both worlds really do need to apply here. enormous community operational maturity developed by the CNCF, even project evolution, life cycles that are really mature with CNCF right now that we don't see, that are vastly needed in the Web3 space with immature smart contracts that get hacked every day for millions of dollars. So we need that operational maturity in the Web3 space, but we need the Web3 compensation models, the reward incentives for everyone, almost every stakeholder, absolutely brought into the Web2 space, if you will. The majority of how open source on GitHub, for example, works today. And those are both very challenging things to actually implement because there's cultural objections to overcome. There's, again, basic misunderstandings and myths and FUD to overcome. And then there's an education around how tokenomics can really work. And certainly an update for the Web3 community in terms of why you want to have a DevSecOps lifecycle and why you want to have automated auditing of smart contracts, not always manual auditing of smart contracts, and why you want to be transparent about these pieces of code like smart contracts that instantly settle millions, if not billions of dollars of transactions, degenning your way into it, right? Being a degenerate, really kind of like moving fast and breaking things has these consequences that we don't really want to live with.
Absolutely. And so certainly, I think one of the things that I had further down in my list of questions to jump into, which you mentioned there in passing, is the whole cybersecurity piece. Because from what I understand, in addition to your keen interest and background in data, cybersecurity is another area that you've spent a lot of time in. And there's a lot of problems still to be solved in Web3 with respect to the security. Right now, the kind of gold standard is cold wallets, and the barriers to entry for using one of those for folk like ourselves, fine, we can get it, but that's not the sort of thing that the less technically inclined people can easily work with. And there are initiatives like social recovery and so on, and multi-sig that can kind of help, but it's still feels like it's got a bit of a way to go. So what are your perspectives in terms of where you think we need to get to with respect to cybersecurity and Web3?
Love this topic. So cybersecurity is really a common thread between not just my old world and my current world, but certainly between, I think, this transition we keep referring to of Web2 to Web3. In that, you recall I mentioned integrity always fascinated me, data integrity, when I was in the database world and initially piqued my interest here into Bitcoin and blockchains. For practitioners of cybersecurity and even outside observers, this is an interesting concept to understand. There's a fundamental triad in cybersecurity, a triangle. And everyone remembers it because it's called a CIA triangle. And everyone, of course, thinks of the brand of the Central Intelligence Agency. It's not directly related to the CIA at all. Indirectly, it is, but not directly. It stands for confidentiality, integrity at the core of it, and availability. So confidentiality is all about how we encrypt our data so people that shouldn't see it can't see it, and those authorized to see it can. Integrity is actually, I'll get to availability because integrity is so fundamental to me. I want to do it last. Availability is around the fact that, okay, if someone ransomwares my data and either wipes it, deletes it, or encrypts it in a way that I can't access it anymore, how can I recover from that event? We used to worry about hard drive crashes or server crashes or hurricanes or other weather events taking out a data center. And that was the occasional data availability loss, or someone cuts a network cable or makes a DNS misconfiguration error, most commonly. But we used to think about these occasional outages and having no access to data, no availability of the data. Now it's routine with ransomware. The real stats behind cyber attacks are much more scary than just the headlines we read, and the volume of headlines themselves over the past couple of years have been very, very scary. So data availability is now a constant challenge, not an exceptional occasion or event. So availability is very fundamentally separate than confidentiality, and is another, pillar or leg of the three-legged stool. And then finally, integrity is how you cross-examine those first two. So it's okay to have confidentiality of your data managed through encryption, but encryption, when you tease it apart, is all about managing keys, encryption keys, to access that data. And unfortunately, the way the technology works is it's never that simple that you have encryption and keys. Key management is the weakness that attackers exploit all day long, meaning that you really can't trust the integrity of your data just to encryption and keys. You've got to constantly cross-reference and make sure that even the administrator, the key master of all the keys in your organization, can tamper with the data, and that tampering can't be with impunity and visibly. So the ability to double check what's happening on the encryption side, the confidentiality side, is the fundamental benefit of integrity. And also, in a standard availability sense, let's say you're good and you do backups, and let's say you practice your restores and you have a major data outage and something happens to your data where you have to recover it. How do you know what you're recovering is actually the right data? How do you know that it hasn't been tampered with, there hasn't been some kind of hardware software corruption? So that's why integrity is so key. And in the cybersecurity world, it's widely acknowledged, widely respected, and not widely implemented. The business of cybersecurity really falls down, which is why the cyber attacks will continue ad infinitum, is that people assume, ultimately the market, because I don't want to single out just buyers or vendors, it's really that combination. The market assumes that I'm getting integrity from my either confidentiality vendor or from my availability vendor. It's viewed as a feature, not a core product, not a core requirement. And so the triangle is never complete in cybersecurity. And the reason I go into such detail about this CIA triad is that integrity is the first benefit, the core built-in feature that's not optional in Web3, in blockchains, in all these cool DeFi and GameFi features and decentralized apps that we're building. Integrity is assumed, but it's there because it's not optional. So it's okay to assume and imply it, whereas it's optional and assumed and implied in the non-Web3, Web2 cloud world. It's just built in. It's there. And one of the most practical discussions or applications of this feature that's built in to everything Web3 is the whole notion around, isn't Bitcoin primarily just used to fund crime, money laundering and ransomware payments? And again, headlines we read about, certainly those things happen. But what I love about the integrity built into blockchains and built into the entire Web3 stack as a result is you can just mathematically prove to what extent it happens. So we have very well known forensics firms now that are becoming a big industry, blockchain forensics. So you have Elliptic, you have TRM Labs, you have Chainalysis, a number of firms. And because we're talking about transactions on a public ledger with financially motivated, guaranteed integrity across all the transactions on these ledgers, you run the reports. You scan the ledgers, you run the reports, you do the analytics, and you prove exactly what is or isn't claimed. And particularly, Chainalysis, amongst others, publishes these widely read annual reports that show that despite in 2021 the explosive growth of crypto fueled by NFTs and all that, and despite the acknowledged crime that happens on these blockchains and in the NFT marketplace, it's still 0.15% of all crypto transactions. So to put that in context, less than 1/5 of 1% of all crypto transactions can be traced to any kind of criminal activity. And that's the beautiful thing here, is integrity proves how valuable this technology is, quantifies directly for the first time the actual level of crime on it, whereas these are open questions, philosophical questions in a traditional finance world, in a traditional, centralized database world. These are all open questions that will be open forever and subject to manipulation and debate and dispute forever, whereas it's just math in the Web3 world. Run the query, get your results, move on.
Yeah, the integrity piece, as you say, it's absolutely key there. And thinking though about the service providers who ultimately, provide the rails for many individuals to actually engage with Web3, especially in these earlier days where there aren't necessarily the ability, there isn't the ability for individuals to work directly with these decentralized protocols without the, sort of requisite level of knowledge, as we touched on earlier. Do you think that companies have got a real duty to help educate their users if they are providing a sort of Web3 onboarding type service. Think like a centralized exchange, or it could be a centralized NFT platform and so on, to start to educate their users so they care about the integrity issues. Because of course the risk is that people feel, oh, it's an unnecessary detail until something goes wrong. But at the same time, for it to really fulfill its potential, as you say, the integrity piece is absolutely key there.
Yeah, that's a great open topic, I think, again, forever, only because we're dealing with fundamental human nature here, which is everyone wants full power and control over anything they do, particularly their finances, but also their liberties, their human rights, and so forth. But it's a burden, it's toil, it's work, it's a grind to operate or manage that. So governance, we're happy if we even vote at all to just let someone else come up with policy and debate policy and implement policy and then enforce it and so forth. You and I don't want to be policemen, want to be investigators, don't want to be auditors, unless that's our profession. By and large, as daily citizens, we don't want that. Yet we really demand as our rights all the benefits that comes from good policy and good governance and good enforcement and so forth. And all those things translate directly, all those the full agency of rights and responsibilities all translates into the Web3 world. So I think we're going to struggle with the notion, and we're seeing it play out already with really popular marketplaces like OpenSea, where people love the fact that they know the brand, they know it's a big clearinghouse for where I can list my NFT for the broadest possible audience. And when I'm buying it, it have the biggest possible choice of NFTs to buy from. And there are some of these easy to use marketplace user interfaces and experiences built into OpenSea. People like the convenience of OpenSea by and large, but then you dig in one layer deeper and you realize, oh, that gives OpenSea an enormous amount of control, overarching amount of control over the entire industry and marketplace. And oh, by the way, if you actually use OpenSea for your full experience, the way they mint the NFTs for you and all that really locks you into their platform and doesn't really deliver on the full interoperability promise of blockchains and Web3 and DeFi. So it's this constant balance we're going to have to figure out. I don't think we ever get to a perfect state, a perfect plateau where we achieve this balance. I think you have to have leaders like OpenSea demonstrate what's possible. Then you have to have people that like to have operational maturity say, well, the convenience is great, but the implementation is flawed. And you have to have competitors and you have to have regulators push back a little bit. And this constant balance will continuously be chased, I think. And that's on the one hand annoying because there's never stability in any one of these new technologies. But on the other hand, it just pushes people to innovate more and pushes people to protect ultimately consumers and investors over the long term. So that constant struggle for balance is one of those Darwinistic evolutionary things that makes us adapt and makes us stronger and better overall. But in the middle of it all, it does seem like a struggle.
Yeah, absolutely. It's impossible to get these things perfect and appeal to everyone.
And I realize there's no point in aiming for stable balance and perfection. It's just always striving for it and realizing in the long term you achieve it. But it's through the constant effort, it's through the constant pushing of boundaries and balancing these things out, counteracting some of the negative forces and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've recently launched a company, ClickToNFT. Tell us a bit more about it, because it's a platform that provides passive income for creators on social media. Yeah, how did it come about? And please, I'd love to hear more about it.
It mirrors the journey I've talked about, not surprisingly, where originally the technology was built for the cybersecurity market, and we found out firsthand there is no product market fit in a business to business go to market of selling just integrity alongside confidentiality and availability to cybersecurity customers. A few passionate champions of ours really loved it, but the broad market didn't. I joke we had product customer fit more than product market fit. And so when the big announcement, the industry sort of shaking announcement of this artist, Mike Workman Beeple, selling his collage of JPEGs, and again, already a reputed digital artist, for $69 million to an investor, Metakovan, that woke everybody up. It certainly woke me up and began my my pivot, as many startups do, from a go-to-market of business to business uh, towards a go-to-market of direct to consumer, where the blunt reality is retail NFT buyers, as we've discussed, directly value integrity. The whole value in today's version of the NFT market is that I can prove this content is tied to a particular wallet, and this particular artist has associated themselves with this wallet, this creator. And now I can prove to everyone else that I own the rights or I own this copy of the creator's work. And that transparent, globally distributed proof, more than the whole copy paste, I've got a copy of your JPEG now, or a copy of your NFT. It's the proof of that that's valuable. It's the widely acknowledged ability to say, I went to a Christie's or Sotheby's and I bought some artwork. And if you contact this notary, they'll prove to you that I own it. Just reinventing that whole process and making it digital, globally accessible, transparent, and the proof of that free. That's what's so exciting here. Now that got me into the market and realizing, okay, we see now retail NFT consumers valuing integrity much more than the cybersecurity market. How can we serve this new retail market? And the only major advantage we had in our intellectual property is the fact that we weren't a better minter of NFTs than an OpenSea, because minting an NFT is an industry standard process that you can follow right now to keep it interoperable. But we were forced to operate in a high volume environment. So something that's a routine number that intimidates the heck out of NFT people, but in the cybersecurity world, the average Global 2000 organization, Fortune 500 in the US, will have billions and billions of security events, which can be loosely described as security logs. They'll have billions of those happen per hour. One of our standard benchmarks was, can you attest to the integrity, that cybersecurity language, attest to the integrity of every one of my security events, which is verify the integrity of every one of my log lines. And the answer to that is yes, you always want that, but at billions per hour, it's actually quite a bit of computational resource overhead to do. We figured out a way to do that on chain. And that actually translates to 1 million NFTs minted per second. And that's an average watermark, or a mark for us. It's not even a high end mark. And we had to do that at a fixed cost. So we figured, okay, in the retail NFT market, the volumes aren't there right now. Even in the biggest marketplace in the world, OpenSea, it comes nowhere close to doing 1 million NFTs per second, even on the minting side. It does thousands, tens of thousands of NFTs minted per second, and even less of those sold per second. Where could we apply this volume and scale, this web scale? And social media was the obvious answer, where there are millions upon millions of posts created daily, particularly if you look at the combination of a TikTok plus an Instagram, of course, plus a Facebook, YouTube, and so forth. There are almost 1 million pieces of content posted daily. And because we have the ability to automatically mint every single one of those as NFTs, and be able to create what's called an on-chain audit trail, provenance and lineage of that content from the moment it's created all the way through whatever social engagement and influence it has, so that the buyer gets a lot more social proof when they look at buying it. That is an NFT experience that we're pioneering for the industry, but is really enabled by the volume. And that's how we believe we're going to mainstream NFTs and crypto by extension, more than some of the other great Web3 innovations so far, and that we can make it automatic and we can make it implicit and easy to mint NFTs, to influence NFTs, and make it super safe and convenient and highly automated, one-click buy now experience like Amazon, to check out and buy your NFTs with any currency you want. If you like pound sterling, if you like US dollars, if you like Singaporean dollars, if you like Indian rupees, you shouldn't have to go to Binance or Coinbase and trade your fiat currency for Bitcoin or Ethereum or some other coin and then transact that. You should have the option of, yes, if I'm a crypto savvy person, absolutely check out with Ethereum. Or if I'm a retail person, which the vast majority, over 80% of the population worldwide, is still non-crypto savvy, I just want to check out with my Apple Pay or current payment system, that's how you can check out as well. So these are all the elements we're weaving into. Call it a next gen NFT marketplace, if you will. But for me, it's really bringing alive now a creator economy that just wasn't possible before, between 50 million self identified content creators that are not all yet benefiting from this NFT and Web3 stack, and the billions and billions of social media users that want to participate in this new creator economy, but don't like the ad driven transaction fee only model.
So from the perspective of like a creator, someone who doesn't know about the crypto side, they've just heard NFTs, they've heard about NFTs. Well, what's kind of the workflow or the process they go through? Say, yeah, just to kind of understand it from their perspective.
There have been some great articles written already documenting the many layers and complexity, gates and friction as a creator, where you've got to upload your work, you've got to mint the NFT, you've got to potentially pay some upfront fees just to be able to do that, and a bunch of format conversions. And then, of course, you've got to be able to describe and promote your work. There's just a lot of toil and effort and financial risk involved for creators in creating these NFTs. So, on the one hand, many artists, creators are not technical. The process, even with some of the latest services that are really good, like Mintable and so forth, aren't simple enough yet. And the workflow certainly isn't convenient enough yet for every creator to just go ahead and mint NFTs. And more importantly, on the social media side, the risk of plagiarism has been rampant for years, where I've spoken to so many creators, whether they're photographers, musicians, screenwriters, even, and so forth. They will not share their best work over social media because then they've given it away. They can't monetize it. So you've got this combination, this fusion of problems for creators, where they really can't enjoy the benefits of an NFT economy right now, which is monetize your work, develop a loyal fan base that actually supports you, doesn't just subscribe to you, create community shared profits. If you want that model, if you're not Taylor Swift or Rihanna that can actually monetize through Spotify, because shockingly few artists actually can. So for the vast majority of artists, that long tail of artists, the ability to use the best of NFTs and the best of social media, that combination isn't there right now. And that's exactly the automation of workflows that we enable with Click. So the most driving characteristic of Click is we know everyone's time is finite. We know people don't want to or can't make time to go to another social media platform in addition to the main ones they use, or certainly another marketplace that takes time away from where they like to spend time, which is interacting with friends on social media. So the ability to make or infuse the NFT economy through workflows directly into what you do on social media, which is post, or actually browse mostly and post. I think there's that 1-9-90 rule, which is 90% of people just browse social media, 9% comment, and only 1% post. And those are the only actions we expect our users to ever do, which is continue to just use social media with your existing identities today. But when you post, if you opt into our environment, every post becomes an NFT. You can customize that if you don't want every post to be an NFT. When you interact, when you comment, when you like, there's some rewards in our token economy. When you comment, there's more rewards. When you share, there's even more rewards as an influencer. But you don't have to do anything artificial. You just engage with good content. You're implicitly curating the good content you like anyway. And all those benefits really accrue to the buyer, which right now on an OpenSea marketplace, there's too many examples of buyers easily getting scammed by copy paste versions of somebody else's artwork, even inside verified collections, which is disturbing right now. We have many, many anecdotes of people just not being, not not being as sophisticated a buyer as you need to be, and you shouldn't need to be for a retail experience, a cybersecurity expert to detect what's an authentic NFT versus a fake NFT. So all those benefits of creator, provenance and lineage, influencer, social proof, all those benefits really accrue to first-time NFT buyers on a marketplace that don't have to overthink this and know there's actually a lot of a lot of authenticity in what they're purchasing. And then that actually has long-term value in the secondary market for speculators that are now speculating on work that's already been purchased on social media. but now has all this original authenticity, social proof, and obviously that authentic initial purchase. It's likely to not be a wash trade because in a mainstream world, one user equals one wallet. Until the user gets more mature and sophisticated and has multiple wallets of their own, in this simple initial marketplace, it's one user, one wallet. So the likelihood of wash trading goes down dramatically because you don't have multiple wallets per user.
So it can potentially extend really to any sort of online activity. So it could be someone uploading a video, releasing a song, putting out an Instagram post, a tweet, or whatever else. But it's where you can get any sort of engagement.
Yeah, this is independent of any particular social media platform or network. It's an aggregate actually across all of them. And even though the experience is native to each, in reality, once you have some kind of momentum as a Click user, you can list content that you've purchased on Instagram for sale on TikTok if you want, or on YouTube. We are agnostic. We don't really care about where the content comes from and where the distribution of content is initially versus the liquidity of the content, long term in its life cycle in the secondary market. So there's some really powerful meta network effects here. Not to mix terms, it's not about Facebook meta, it's about the fact that you can have this macro economy across social medias that's a powerful economic force at a just retail familiar level that we're enabling here. But it does start humbly, one demographic of one social network at a time, just so that we prove the initial traction out.
Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of blowing my mind a bit hearing more about ClickNFT and how you've gone from this perspective of being like a B2B data integrity guy to then seeing how it can apply to consumer and NFT, and it's going to take some time for me to digest this stuff properly.
You're in good company, but I'd love to continue to shepherd you through that journey.
That's it. I think there could be a lot more deep dives here as well. But let's we'll keep going. You've got an event coming up as to the Web3 Summit. I'd love to hear more about that, and especially because you've got this other thing called WAGMAs associated with it too. So it's really fun stuff, but also at the same time there's serious intent behind it, of course. But yeah, just tell me more about it, please.
Let's start with WAGMA as the fun part. So we're all going to make it. WAGME, of course, is a common meme and term and phrase in the Web3 culture and community. So we decided we're all going to make a summit is what we're going to call the community around the summit. And why a Web3 summit? There have been some in the past, some technical ones in Switzerland in particular a couple of years ago. Well, for us, and this is primarily my lead investor and I, Deborah Perry-Piscioni, nature hates a vacuum. And when we try and explain not even some of the more sophisticated click concepts, but just the basics of what a blockchain is, what Bitcoin is, what Ethereum and the whole developer ecosystem around Ethereum is, we get a lot of confused stares from all kinds of investors. There's a small sliver, like a 5% maybe or less in the world that are crypto savvy investors. And then the vast majority of them are still trying to wait, on what Goldman Sachs is saying. And surprise, surprise, this week, on the front page of the Goldman Sachs website are cryptocurrencies and the metaverse. So this whole mainstream adoption is still in that early phase. We're not even in the early majority phase. And we figured, Deborah and I, let's just go ahead and create a summit to answer these questions because these are not easy questions to answer. The technology is incredibly complex and the whole phenomenon, the impact is multidisciplinary. So there's not just pure math you have to understand, pure technology you have to understand. If you're very Bitcoin centric, you've really got to understand energy policy and the very counterintuitive way that Bitcoin impacts energy usage and generation, which is actually a net positive once you understand it. And then you've got to understand how a developer ecosystem has the aligned incentives with a validator ecosystem, with a mining ecosystem, with a user and a services ecosystem. So these are complex things. There's lots of market education required. Then you have to combat, of course, all the FUD of will it kill the planet? Is it all full of crime? Is it all a Ponzi scheme? So yet more market education. Then finally, once you sort of cross that chasm, you do encounter tribalism in the community. So there are these maxis, these pure evangelicals that basically believe that it's only Bitcoin or only Ethereum or pick your protocol, only my protocol, Dogecoin, will rule them all, right? And so there's so much hand holding and shepherding that has to happen for new people, new institutions, and the leaders that are fundamentally people, right? Humans at these institutions to absorb all this and make sense of it, realizing, hopefully, as they get themselves educated, that this is the new e commerce for this coming decade that will likely define a lot of this coming century. We figured there isn't an event, there isn't a community, isn't an event focused on that. There's definitely plenty of really good conferences for developers like ETH Denver recently, the Miami Bitcoin conference. If you're into promoting coins, there's no better place. If you're into promoting NFTs, there's no better place than some of these high profile conferences. But if you're that 80%, particularly at the institution level, that wants to learn about this responsibly, sensibly, make some safe long-term decisions, there's no event that really caters to you for that, and that's precisely what the Web3 Summit is.
Yeah, there are just so many details that people need to be across, and at one level, as you say, the NFTs are kind of a big enabler to bring people in, but you just getting the messaging right for that sort of audience, it is hard because there's all the fun meme-based stuff, but then there's also the people who need to see the serious stuff too to really get across it, and because they're the people who are writing a lot of the checks as well that will grow this stuff more and more over time.
Exactly. And it's an art to be able to communicate with them and communicate such a radical new concept. But again, it's a vacuum right now, and it has to be filled.
And so just as we wrap up here, Val, start actually with the Web3 Summit. If people want to learn more about it, where can they go to find out about it?
We obviously have a website, and I caution you, some old spam filters or antivirus web filters might filter this whole domain now, but it's web3summit.xyz. XYZ is that three-letter domain that is a bit controversial for some old filters. It did have some cybersecurity risks associated with it in the early days, but it's a huge part of the Web3 community. It's it's like the .com of the Web3 community. So that XYZ is one of the domains we've chosen. There's wagmas.xyz. I believe we're going to add wagmas.com as well, so that it's again more approachable to non-crypto people in the audience that we're really targeting in terms of people that want to get into it. There's also online. You can certainly find us at Web3 Summit on LinkedIn. You can find us at Web3. I believe we had to do _summit, or just search either way on Web3 Summit or _summit on Twitter. You'll find us there. And if you go to our website, if you go to our Twitter or LinkedIn, you will find a link to our Discord community as well.
And then also, if people want to learn more about ClickToNFT or also reach out to you, what channels are you active on?
You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter as at ValB00. My friends call me ValBoo on there. You can also find us even on Instagram, I forgot to mention. So you can find Web3 Summit on Instagram. You can find ClickToNFT. If you want to find me, I'm there under my name, of course, on Instagram as well.
Awesome. Well, Val, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and I feel like we could have kept going for another hour or two easily here, just with going into more detail. So we'll definitely have to arrange a follow up in the not too far off future.
Podcast a sequel for sure. Let's do it.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Val.
Pleasure.
Hi, it's Conor Svensson here again. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm really excited to share with you that I've written a book, The Blockchain Innovators Handbook, a leader's guide to understanding, adopting and succeeding with this disruptive technology. I've been wanting to share my learnings about blockchain and Web3 for a number of years with a wider audience, and I'm really excited that I can do this now. This book covers everything from the fundamentals of the technology through to opportunity identification and implementation for your business to ensure that you can be one of the big beneficiaries of the wider transition to Web3 that's taking place now. The book is available in physical as well as digital form. For more information, head to web3labs.com/innovators.